All right, hello, welcome to EUphoria Season 6, Episode 6. I'm Dracos, here with Frostgurn. You can call us Mom and Dad. We found out last night that Deficio really hates that brand name, so shout out to you, Deficio. You can call us Mom and Dad. Deficio, you can especially call us Mom and Dad. We're available Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud.
I don't know why he hates it so much.
It's kind of, to be fair, it is kind of weird. It's just the one that people voted for, so we're kind of just here now.
So where I got the idea from is I play pop trivia over Zoom with my partner's parents. Oh. And because she's British, they spell it mum, M-U-M, instead of M-O-M. Mm-hmm. And so their pub trivia quiz name is Dumb and Mad because they just swap the D. And I'm just like, that's actually hilarious. And maybe it's because I'm almost 30 now that I just find the humor in that. But I'm like, that's a banger.
We're forever young, Frostground. That's what we're ruining our forever young, hip with the kids branding by calling ourselves Mom and Dad. Oh, God, saying the words hip with the kids is just gross. I don't know how Trevor does it every week.
Speaking of.
Bad week for LEC is my first thing, because we're going to talk a little bit about... We have Bwipo on the show today. That's kind of the important thing, and that's going to be a big chunk of time. You guys memed about it when we asked you for Twitter questions, but Bwipo is a talker, and he has a lot of information to share. But before we talk to Bwipo, we got to talk about the league holistically, and that's why I wrote, bad week for LEC. Because, Frost, this might have been the worst week of mechanical play we've seen in LEC history.
So here's the thing. I watch a lot. So I watch LEC. I watch occasional LCS. I watch the LCS Academy League. I watch some of the ERLs.
Wait, why is it... Excuse me? You watch occasional LCS and not occasional LCS Academy?
So hilariously, for whatever reason, I always catch the Academy Leagues, and I watch extensively a lot of I probably watch more Academy in North America than I actually watch their professional play. And I'm like, this guy's not half bad. Anyway, I digress. I watch a lot of fiestas. I watch a lot of I can't say that word, some fiddlesticks in good times, let me tell you that. I'm really scared for the LEC right now. It is really dire. I know that there's so much hype because our league is so competitive and we have some really fun teams like Rogue and Mad Lions, yada, yada, yada. You've heard it all before. I also watch the LPL. Guys, if you're not watching the LPL, let me just break this down for you. We're about to get massacred. We're about to just go into the wood chipper and just get ripped apart. This is not good right now. The LEC domestically, really exciting. The LEC internationally, if we're playing like this, really, really, really scary.
I mean, even outside of the international thing, I was nervous just on a week-to-week level because of the individual mechanical mistakes. And I think even if our league was playing super well right now, we'd still be scared of the LPL. So that's double, triple scary. We're struggling when we compare ourselves to international teams. I think it's the safe bet. Obviously, we can never know until we get there. And the LPL appears to be stronger than ever. What was it you said to me last week? They have 6 good teams?
They have 6 good teams.
We have 2.
We don't even have 2. We have 1.5.
Ugh. Anyway, there's that said, internationals are far away. And the good news is that LEC remains exciting. Mad Lions, Rogue, doing well. Nice. My big question, since we're going to talk to Fnatic, I got to ask about the other side of the Dynasty Legacy Kings coins, and that's G2 Esports. And how much longer do we wait for G2 to figure it out?
I mean,
before we just go, well, okay, you're dead in the water.
Oh, we got to have real talk. I just think circumstance situation. Shout out to Grabs. If you guys haven't watched, I would really recommend going and watching the PGL that Grabs did on Saturday night last week. He was super candid in the interview, and it basically broke down to this. It's hard right now. Circumstances, for obvious reasons, dealt us a really poor hand. And now, because of meta, because of circumstance, they're fighting an uphill battle. G2 has never really been put in this position. I still have faith, and he still has faith. And a lot of the pro teams, people get mad at us all the time for this. But at the same time, I'm like, if everyone's saying the same thing, maybe you guys are the problem. G2 will come back and will be a competitive team. But now the question is, will G2 come back to the highs that they once were? And now I'm pretty safe on no, probably not this time around or in the immediate future, just because of everything that's happened around the team. But at the same time, they're still a good team, but is good enough now? Bwipo has an amazing quote, and now I'm just going to steal it. It's if you're not great on Fnatic, you're just bad. And I think for G2 and Fnatic, it's the same thing. If you're not amazing, you're just trash. And no one else is really held to that same standard. Like, Misfits can have just the most atrocious games or whatever, and people be like, yeah, but they'll probably still maybe make playoffs. They're still okay. Maybe bench this guy. Like, there'll be a little bit of flame. But Fnatic will have, like, a crazy comeback where they out-team fight, and people will be like, burn them, drown them in the water.
To be fair, those Orion and Kha'Zix plays were blind worthy. You made an incredibly inappropriate eye bleach reference. You're like, bleach your eyes, Fnatic fans. It's never.
That was an Origin game. No. Thanks to Fish.
We're riding the line every day. Okay, so I guess I'm just gonna keep asking you questions because I don't have as much faith, but I think you're right. Circumstance is a really important factor, and we're seeing for both G2 and Fnatic they're struggling, but. Are the Fnatic, OG, G2? These are the teams that we just said they're getting playoffs. No questions asked.
Okay.
Are those playoff spots still safe the same way they were when we were talking about the teams at the start of summer?
Yes, because I think that all you necessarily need really is consistency, and it feels like if you just took different elements from Vitality, Excel, SK, and Misfits, and like kind of put them all together, you might get close to what you would assume in Origin, Fnatic, or G2. I also think it's unfair for Origin to be grouped up with Fnatic and G2 right now. I think that's just rude to Origin.
Well, those are the teams that are currently more in the middle of the pack that
they're supposed to be like the givens
that we guaranteed playoff spot to. Mad Lions would be on that list too, but they're clearly number one and have basically already made playoffs, so I just didn't include them in that list.
I just think that there's still a lot of things that are missing. One of the nice things is, and we had dinner with Martin last night, this was part of the discussion, is if you look at a team like SK as an easiest example, they just know how they want to play the game, which is get crown shot, a really powerful champion, and kind of play around that win condition. And I think when you simplify it like that, you find, or you're more likely to find consistency in what you're getting versus a team that's experimenting a lot, like maybe a Fnatic, as Bwipo talks about. And in the current meta and the current way that the game is played, that's why the standings have been so chaotic and so volatile. In terms of some positive sides, because I feel like I don't just want to like sit here and trash on the region. The Shadows Lee Sin. Oh my God.
There's a mechanics video out. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure it's number one on Reddit. And if you haven't seen it by the time this podcast comes out, the rock that you're living under needs better internet connection. Because it's insane. That's the best.
That is one of the best Lee Sin. And I know that
plays of all time.
There's a conversation of, there's a lot of really talented Lee Sin players, of course, in the LPL. There's a lot of individual talented players. Here's my other glass half full. Yes, I'm terrified of the LPL that they're just going to absolutely body us at any international event. But also, the LPL historically has been a region where you master one style and you play that style so well that if the meta comes into the perfect storm, you can win a world championship. And so I'm like, teams, you gotta simplify. Stop trying to be everything. Just be one thing, LEC teams, which is why Mad Lions, I'm like, yes, this is our new hope. Let's ride that hopefully all the way to at least semifinals.
So what you're telling me is that for all the script writing memes that people make about Worlds, Riot does kind of control Worlds. Like if they just buff team fighting and the Chinese team that's insane at team fighting just wins Worlds? Is it that simple?
There was a lot that happened. It was the most Invictus gaming experience to have IG win a world championship before ever winning a domestic title. I'm like, this burns my soul right now.
Good old LPL. All right, like in general, I'm still really excited about the league because while these games are...
Domestically, this league is popping off.
Yeah, it's an absolute banger every week. And while they are difficult to cast, as we learned in our Fnatic Misfits game...
That was hilarious.
I got fairly, I think, called bias because I talked too much about Fnatic.
Okay, no. I'm actually just going to sell you out right now. It was Reddit. It was absolutely a biased cast. But the thing was, it was conscious. I don't know if it was conscious on Dracos' end.
Not as much.
Absolutely conscious on my end. I was like, I'm Misfits versus Fnatic, and I had to make the conscious, and maybe you can criticize me, but here's my thought process. I'm like, this game is super important for Fnatic because Fnatic fans are ready to just destroy this team. They're ready to run them down into the streets right now, and this game could be like a make or break for potentially their playoffs. I'm like, okay, Fnatic is obviously like the heavier storyline here. I'm probably gonna get more longevity over it. This is a team that has a bigger brand, more following, so I'm gonna cast this from Fnatic's perspective. And in the early game, you can hear me doing it, but I realize I'm on that fine line and I switch, and you can physically hear me say, like, that was an awful something from Fnatic, but on the other side, everything's going for Misfits. So I was like, I gotta get a little bit of the Misfits in there to like build it up because I do want to praise Misfits when they're doing well, but consciously I was like, I have to cast this game from Fnatic's perspective because if they just run it down, that's the narrative that matters. And if I'm biased, I'm sorry, I gave you the better narrative.
And here's the thing. On my end, I didn't talk about Misfits enough. I just kept casting everything from the Fnatic perspective, and I don't mind that. And then when we read Reddit, which we on occasion do, believe it or not, you watch the live thread, and they're like, my God, this is the most biased cast ever. But then, because through sheer dumb luck and Misfits incompetence, bless up Misfits, I'm right about the Fnatic comeback.
You did see the composition.
People are like, they're geniuses. How did they know? They said this would happen.
I will say my language is very specific. I was like, Misfits composition, very strong right now. They're slapping them with their wallets. I never once said Misfits have this in the bag. Because I was looking at that comp, I was like, that's not going to be a good time in 25 minutes.
Anyway, I think the TLDR over there for me is I got lucky as a caster on that one because Fnatic did pull it back, but small apology to Misfits. I should have given you more praise in the early game.
I'm next to Dracos, and this guy is just going ham on Fnatic, but like we've seen Fnatic from this position before. They can come back, and then you hear me and be like, Misfits is doing really well, because in my head I'm like, God damn it, Dracos, we're going too hard on Fnatic now. I gotta pull up, and so I'm just like, I'm only talking about Misfits. He's only talking about Fnatic, and then Fnatic come back. I'm like,
I was right all along. We'll just pretend that there was nothing in the middle. If you look at the start and the end of that cast, it was a perfect cast. If you look at the middle, it's a little wishy-washy. And it's just, if you watch, the last 5 minutes.
Like teams, casters experiment during splits.
We don't always hit the nail on the head. So sorry to Misfits. Shout out to the Fnatic fans that I ended up being right there. But yeah, we get there. Anyway, I forgot what I was actually going to say because I had a final point. But we got Bwipo ready to go. So let's go talk to Bwipo instead. It's time for the Bwipo show. Woo! All right, it's now my distinct pleasure, our distinct pleasure.
I was gonna say what?
You're maybe a different level of pleased. I don't want to speak for both of us. We're both pleased. Bwipo is here, top laner of Fnatic, notable League of Legends conversationalist. I think the most repeated comment that we got was for Dracos and Frost at the end of this episode. How many words do you think you got to say total? Which, frankly, I love Bwipo. I love that you always have so much to say. How are you doing this fine day?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a pretty early morning for me, but other than that, I think it's a fine day.
Yeah, I'm going to say shout out to you. I was not, so normally when we have our guests on, because we have a lot of pro players on, they're almost like never up. Mm-hmm. And you were like, as Dracos and I walked into the room, we were like already up, had your mic in place. I was like, damn, this man is punctual.
Quick spoiler behind the scenes, because Bwipo, I know you live in your own apartment, but more often than not, we're like messaging the manager who's like running over to the player apartment or team house to like knock on the door to like physically drag the dude out of bed to get him in front of a camera. Right. So much appreciated.
I've been there. I've been that player. Punctual is probably not what my teammates associate with me with, as I'm someone that always tries to calculate the maximum amount of time I have to waste. That said, when I just have to, walk into the right room and sit down on my chair, it's rather easy to be on time, which is fortunately the case in this situation.
And do not be fooled, YouTube land. That is a giant cat tree behind Bwipo, and if you are so lucky,
that's right,
as Dracos and I have been, you will get to see some amazing cats.
He's sitting right there right now. He'll may or may not want to.
I'm not gonna lie. It's delayed our recording.
Nacho, the Scottish folds.
We've been delayed by like 3 minutes because we were just getting really excited about Bwipo's cats, and our producer, despite loving cats himself, was like, "Guys, get it together. We got to start the segment of the show."
I regret nothing. Okay, start the segment of the show.
All right, so, Bwipo, I wish we were inviting you here during the classic Fnatic victory lap when you're like, X0 at the top of the standings. But we're not. We're inviting you during kind of a sad time for Fnatic right now, and I kind of wanted to get your take on it, starting off with what Reckless talked to me about when I interviewed him after your second surprise win.
Surprise at 2-0
last week. So the statement that's been floating around a lot, and I don't know who originally started it, but a lot of people seem to be buying into it, is that Fnatic is a group of great players that are not a good team. And Reckless agreed with it, and I kind of want to get your...
my statement, sir.
Was that your statement
was
first?
My statement.
All right. Well, God bless. You're a trendsetter, Frostgren. Now, Reckless agreed with it, and I wanted to see what your perspective was, Bwipo, on that statement that Fnatic is a group of good players that aren't really a good team.
I mean, right now I would say that's true. Has it always been true? In a way, perhaps. But I think that connecting to each other during the game is something that professional players struggle with a lot, and I think it's a skill that many professional players aim to own even though it's not something that's being seen very often, it's not something you pay attention to. It's not something that really shows until you've actually accomplished to have all 5 of your players be connected. And being connected, to put it simply, is when you're playing the game, everybody's doing something to contribute towards that goal. So for example, if you're trying to play around bottom lane, if your mid laner is roaming bot, that you pull your top laner from top lane to mid lane, and any type of advantage you can get from the mid lane in the normal case, right? Because you're roaming from mid lane to the bottom lane, is now being created top lane because your top laner took over mid lane, which means that, in other words, your top laner is involved or connected to a play that's happening bottom lane. And that's something that's like, it's a very simple way of explaining it, but ultimately this is what you want your team to be, right? Everyone covers for each other, and then ultimately in the end of that play, your bot lane's going to probably swap to Herald, because that's a very common play that's very powerful right now. You're going to grab the Herald, and then your top laner is going to involve himself in that Herald play, and either you full swap or you half, like, it depends on how you're going to play that game, but the point is everyone's connected from that point onwards, and you can easily involve yourselves in the plays, because either you have teleport advantage, or you have a teleport, they have a teleport. Point being, oh, sorry about that. You connect everybody. Your whole team is connected, and that's what matters. And that's something that right now, us as a team, we don't really have. And that's something that we're struggling with a little bit, because we're not really finding ways to connect everybody. Often people are being left alone on the side lane, especially later on in the game. I experienced that even though Nemesis is often very strong, we leave him alone for a second, and we have to go through way more effort of getting him off that weak side of the map into our strong side, rather than having already had him on the strong side. And there's multiple reasons why that happens, but this is just one of the things that we experience. So I wouldn't say that we're a bad team. I wouldn't say that we're great either. And because Fnatic has that niche of, like, if you're not great, you're bad. I mean, I feel like that's kind of how people treat us. Like the fact that we won last week, in my opinion, does show that we're a pretty good team, in fact, because not every team would win those games, and that's the way I want to look at things.
Glass half
when it comes
full.
to, yeah, like that would be a nice way, right? Like I think that, especially the Misfits game, we showed some very solid team fighting, in my opinion, right? Like, could have been better in the early game, and I was part of the problem. Don't get me wrong, but ultimately that game was won fair and square.
I want
through
to,
team fighting.
because I agree with this, but before we kind of like pick into the Misfits fight, I want to back up a little bit, Bwipo, because I find it really interesting, the evolution that this Fnatic roster has taken, especially when it's the exact same iteration of the roster that was in the spring finals. And so I wanted to kind of direct the conversation from there. You guys looked like a completely different animal in spring than you do in summer, with virtually no roster swap. Obviously, there's a changeover in coaching staff, but I don't know how much that impacts it. And so the biggest thing is obviously the meta shift, the fact that team fighting is much more prominent in this current meta, whereas previously you guys could play in a 1-3-1 or a 1-4, or have like multiple options where more people have agency. At least this is what Grabs is kind of explaining on PGL and his opinion of why G2 have fallen down the standings, among other reasons. And I wanted to kind of like check with you, like, is this communication was fine and then it got bad? Is this Fnatic figured out how to play the previous meta, and now in this current meta, maybe your guys' weaknesses that were always there are being exposed? Is this changing of mentality from certain players? Like, what has led to kind of the, not the downfall, but the stalling out of Fnatic? Because as you said, when you guys aren't great, you're shit, which I think is such an apt way to explain the Fnatic experience.
Well, that's a mouthful to start with, but I think that honestly, both G2 and Fnatic start with the same issue. Finals, when it was all lopsided, and it was decided in such a way that both teams figured, like, I guess this must be the meta, right? Because Fnatic ran around bullying people really in spring, playing whatever the hell they wanted, playing fast early games, playing aggressive champions left and right. And then all of a sudden, when they tried to do that in the finals against G2, we won't talk about it. You know, that's how bad it was. You don't even want to talk about it. Never happened. You're just like, nope. No, that
I like
finals
how
never
you,
happened.
you say they as if you were.
This Fnatic roster
Exactly.
just
I
bombed
never
in the
played
final. Crazy.
I
how
never
that
played that
happened.
finals. In fact, I never showed up. That's the whole point, right? And I think that that's something people don't realize, is that the biggest issue there was that, in fact, Fnatic's top laner never showed up, which means that if you're playing 4v5, it's hard to win no matter what strategy you're using. Jokes aside, the point is that we were playing a very aggressive style. You counterpicked Ornn with Sylas, you play Lee Sin in the jungle, you have, I don't even remember what we had mid in the first game.
Well, you eventually had
you
an
know,
Azir.
Yeah, but the first game, I don't remember what we had. I actually don't remember. Did we have a Zero in that game? I think we
No,
might
you
have,
only got it
in
blind
the
pick
first
game 3.
I don't remember what I had mid first game, but and we had a bottom lane that was scaling, or Aphelios something, Aphelios Tama, I think, and that was kind of the meta, right? Like you have strong laners, silently use a top lane counter pick or a mid lane counter pick, whichever you get on blue side, whichever you
This
want
was
on red
the
side.
Perks played Azir and Nemesis played Vagar.
There we go, Vigar, the counter pick, right? So everyone, like, I get my counter pick into Ornn, we get our counter pick into Azir. Our solo lane should be solid. Sure, Vigar's more on the scaling end, but ultimately, eventually, there will be pressure there. You've got your pressure point in Sylas. Lee Sin is around to shake things up. And you play the game from that perspective, right? Like, you're going to get outscaled, but it's on the enemies to make it there. That's the idea, right? After that series, I think the general consensus was it's on the aggressive team to make sure the game ends before they get there. And I think that's what made G2 and Fnatic have a different perspective on the meta, because ultimately they just won against the strongest aggressive team, given by the fact that we beat every other team in the league that was playing aggressively and got to the finals. Which means that if they can beat us playing such a comp, which is super scaling comp, then it must make sense to play the same style against everybody else, right? Wrong. I think what ended up happening there is that teams like Mad Lions and Rogue, they just picked their meta. They're like, you know what? We're Mad Lions. We're going to pick Lee Sin, whatever has mid priority, let Kaiser play anything that has CC and has keys that go forward. And we're going to take it from there. And what ends up happening is that every team in the league that's trying to mimic the scaling composition is like, well, actually, you're not wrong with the idea that the enemy team is, we're demanding the enemy team to get ahead of us, but it appears that they're better at that than we had expected. So now they've gotten ahead of us, and the game seems much harder to play. And I think that on that day, in the finals at least, Fnatic wasn't playing too hot, and I was a big part of that, and that's why, even though we were drafting early game, it didn't work out. And even at times, like game 2 and 3, I picked tanks, right? I was trying to match scaling with champions like Zac and Ornn. I don't think that was right. And that's why it looked even worse, right? But ultimately, I would say that final set the meta for G2 and Fnatic, and maybe even some teams watching it, right? And everyone agreed, except for Rogue and Mad Lions specifically, which continue to play their style. I think Misfits, for example, still play a very early game style. They just flopped in some of the wins early game. Or late game, I'm sorry. They just flopped, which I said wins because they should have been. 2 of those against us, obviously, but I'll take them. But I think that's like the biggest difference in LEC and why the league as a whole looks stronger, because I feel like people undervalue the fact that they're just playing their own style. It's a best of one setting. You come in, you've got your idea, you're just going to play your best game. That's it. That's just it. You're not going to try and do anything that you're not practicing. You're just going to show up. And right now, Mad Lions and Rogue are the 2 teams that have the best idea of how they want to play as a team. And I think that's why that reflects in their standings.
So, what is holding Fnatic back from developing a similar idea and philosophy? Is it just that you feel like Mad Lions and Rogue have been trying a similar strategy through spring, now into summer, and it just takes time, or is this something where Fnatic is struggling to get on the same page? You guys can't figure out what's the best way to play the game? Because surely, like at this point, if you really just want, what Mad Lions is doing is working, you can be just like the teams who in the past would have copied G2 or Fnatic and bring some of the same flair that Mad Lions is bringing, no?
I mean, it's hard to specifically say where it started. But like I'm saying, I think the mix-up came from finals, at least from Fnatic's perspective. The reason why we didn't stick to what we were good at was because it was such a disappointing defeat, right? Like if we go 2-3 and we fight to the death playing our picks and figure something out to make it close, to make it look like our strategy was even worth considering, we would do that. We were not able to make our strategy look like it was worth considering or worth playing in general with how we were playing. So we changed. That change has growing pains. That change eventually didn't work out, given the fact that we were losing. Now we are on a 2-0 week, but still, we're not out of the woods yet, right? But I think that's the difference. I think Mad Lions never really changed because I think they had a taste of that success when they beat G2 in a best of 5, sorry. And I think that's why they just commit to their strategy, right? They were like, you know what, we can beat G2. G2 won. We're going to keep playing the way we're going to keep playing, and we're just going to get really, really good at it.
So
I think that's like the main reason.
in terms of kind of the philosophy that Fnatic is trying to find, or the strategy, and it sounds like you guys are kind of going through like an identity crisis, if you will, and that's bleeding over into communication, and so the team is inherently weaker than it was before. If you can, and obviously you don't need to leak strats or anything like that. When I look at Fnatic's drafts, I feel like there's a huge priority and emphasis on certain jungle picks. Your guys' priority on Graves. You're one of the few teams playing Kha'Zix. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Kha'Zix is absolutely nuts. But to me, it does look like Fnatic really are empowering Selfmade in particular. And the philosophy of drafting seems to be about helping him and then setting you guys up for scaling picks elsewhere, allowing him to farm up, allowing him to be powerful. Whereas when I actually look at your guys' successes, it's when you have champions that can kind of all do your own thing. If that's you on an Urgot, if that's Reckless on a Syndra, if that's Nemesis on, I don't know, a Twisted Fate or whatever. And then you also have like Graves or Kha'Zix running around. And you guys are all like, not a fist, not 5 players making a fist, but 5 players just like poking eyes everywhere and constantly making your own decisions and kind of like outpacing your opponent. I'm like, okay, there seems to be no teamwork there, and it's just Fnatic really brute forcing with their individual talented players. So is this kind of like close? Is this way off? Like, where do you feel with this assessment?
I think that's something that we did more in spring than we are right now. And yes, the truth is that happened in spring. Whereas in summer, we realized that that's not going to fly. It works until it doesn't. Until it doesn't depends on what team you run into and how well on that day you're playing individually as well. In other words, you're relying on the individual members like the whole time, right? It's not, or we have a strategy or we have a team composition that's ready. It's more like, I'm picking Sylas today. How good is my Sylas going to be today? I'm picking Rengar today. How good is my Rengar going to be? Martin's going to pick Aphelios today. How good is his Aphelios going to be? How good is his Kai'Sa's going to be? How good is Selfmade, for example? How good is his Kha'Zix going to be? How good is his Graves going to be? And everyone gets like asked like, how good are you going to play today? Because if the answer is very good, then you're probably going to have a very good day. If the answer is not so great, it does appear that when you have a strategy when everyone's doing their own thing and has so much freedom, you notice that when what they usually give is missing, people struggle. So what you do is try to limit the amount that you have to give in order to get value from the player, right? At least that was the logic. That's why we tried to play such a scaling, or have a different idea on scaling, right? Like early on in the split, we came in with the Grave Soraka thing. What else did we try? I mean, we went 3-0 in the first week, which is surprising to me still, but that week, like I played Cho'Gath a game. I think I played something else. The point is that the idea was to create more coherent team compositions, look at our first pick, try to make use of our first pick as a champion that we prioritize, so build around, in other words. Not just like, oh, this champion's really cool, and then like draft 4 other champions that look really cool too. Even though that's a way of drafting, it's something that we agreed that it felt bad that at times when, for example, we would play Aphelios, even though I think Reckless is a great Aphelios player and probably one of the best in the LEC, we don't have much success with Aphelios. And that comes from the fact that we generally just draft our champions around anything. we just draft them. It's like, oh, this champion is good on his own, that champion's good on his own, so we'll draft that. Rather than finding ways of making Aphelios in specific look good, making that pick, that's our first pick. It should be the focal point of our draft, right? Or at least it should be something that we can build around or choose not to. Whereas champion like Aphelios, you have to build around him in order to get the most out of him.
So let's look at your most
that didn't happen.
recent draft and kind of apply this philosophy, especially like your game against Misfits. I love the fact that you're pulling at the Cho'Gath. I think Cho'Gath very underrated right now for how powerful he is, for how many champions
I agree.
dive back into him. And when I look at that comp, I'm like, okay, Fnatic have not necessarily a death ball comp, but when you guys are all grouped up, it's impossible to dive into you guys. You guys had like a Senna, a Cho'Gath. I think that there was some sort of CC support in there.
The Misfits game, yeah. It was so the Braum, Senna,
Orianna.
Kha'Zix, Orianna, Cho'Gath, yeah.
And I feel like the only thing that doesn't necessarily fit in there is the Kha'Zix. It's not awful, but basically, like, at any point with that comp, if Misfits ever tried to dive back into you guys, it was just going to be a bounce house of, like, hell. Like, they were never going to get through anything. And then when you guys all just, like, grouped up and move around, you were unstoppable. Is that... We kind of talk about words like, Fnatic kind of find like a gimmick that works for them. Is it more so the strategy of this composition works really well at going forward, this composition works really well at going back, this composition excels in its monster control? Like, is that how you guys are thinking about things?
Champion interaction is a huge deal, of course. Like, when we're playing Orianna, like, we don't want to have too many assassins that dive in and Orianna can't actually empower, right? Orianna is very niche in that sense. She's very versatile as a champion. Like, even if you have 4 champions that want to dive in like madmen and try to commit to the enemy backline, she still can just shockwave somebody, She puts the ball on someone, you go, it works out, right? So Orianna in that sense she's very versatile as a champion, so she works no matter what happens in the game. But in that game, and in general, the logic is if we're playing a Senna Orianna type of composition, that we don't like play Wukong. What else is like?
It's
Wukong,
about letting
Lee
the
Sin.
opponent come into you versus trying to go to them.
Exactly. Like, it's even if we want to go to them, we have the option. It's just like it's a matter of having the option. Whereas if you're playing Wukong, it's very difficult to let the enemy like. How do you kite as Wukong, right? You press your E key and then you press your R key and then you're using your clone to run. Like, that's not exactly kiting in my opinion, right? What you want to do is you want to commit, get 2 big ultimates and fight to the death. When you're playing a champion like Cho'Gath, on the other hand, even though the CC is very similar in the sense that they both have a knock-up, Cho'Gath can just chuck out ruptures left and right and just wait for a good opportunity. And I think that's like the biggest difference that people don't necessarily see, is that you can always kite in League of Legends. You can. It's just some champions are much better at playing a team fight slowly than others. So you want to draft those champions with champions that want to play a team fight slowly. Orianna is a champion that wants to play slowly, get a good opportunity, and then strike. But at the same time, she can also play fast. Same thing with Senna. Like, she wants to fight the fight slowly. Kite people, get value out of her passive, make people get tilted at her range, whatever you want, really. But at the same time, she can use her ultimate to just, blow someone out across the map.
Do you have a preference on which one you think is better or which one is easier to execute on when you guys are playing a slow team fight versus like a Zac Leona Wukong bullshit?
Right. I think in general, one thing I've noticed over the course of my career is that one of the reasons I think that I've had success as a player is because I don't let the game happen. And I thought of this really silly way of putting it, because it's always been a meme, right? You always outscale on stage. This is just a fact. You can ask any pro player. If you're on stage, you outscale. That's just the way it is. But I came to realize that I'm a player that even though I outscale, I will never let the enemy scale. That doesn't happen. I outscale them, but I'm not going to let them scale. And I think that's honestly one of the reasons why I've had so much success as a player, because for me personally at least, I feel like a lot of players in the LEC are not used to just being put on the spot. And a lot of the lower tier teams especially have players that struggle to respond to that type of aggression. And what I'm talking about is minute 15, all of a sudden enemy top laner is going absolutely ballistic on you because you decided to contest a mid-wave. I do this a lot. I've done this a lot. And when I stopped doing this, I realized I'm giving this guy so much free time to let him do what he wants. Like, I'm scaling, but he's scaling too. And I don't like that, because I know when I don't let him scale, he's going to have a much harder time playing against me specifically.
I find that in a lot of conversations with pro players, it's almost like everything's put into a vacuum in terms of theory. And you'll often hear from them like, oh, you know, that like even before the matchup is even played or a situation is played out, they'll be like, I can't do that because that's just not how that works. And you very rarely see pro players, especially in the LEC, just like checking if someone's awake, just stepping forward and checking if that guy's paying attention, if you can either be in that zone or if he can even be there or if he has the health to make the trade. Whereas I watch a lot of LPL. I don't know if you watch a lot of LPL. They constantly are checking that shit. People are constantly either testing limits or just making sure that someone's not asleep at the wheel.
Well, the thing about the testing limits thing, and I think the difference between LPL and LEC in that way, and in general, something I've always looked to the LPL for is like a goal in my head. This is what I wanted, right? I feel like in LEC, scrims and stage are purposely different. I don't understand why, but they are. For some reason, in the LEC, you've got like people playing in scrims differently than they would playing on stage. People don't use scrims as a way to replicate the stage games, right? Like scrims are being played, and it's like, I would never do that on stage. And for me, it's like, why would you do that then? Isn't that the whole point of scrims? Like, if you're going to play scrims in a way, please just make sure that you're going to play the same way on stage. And I think that this is something LPL does well, right? They've got the whole solo queue vibe, right? Their scrims are probably the same thing.
I've been in those scrims,
it's even
they're
worse
nuts.
than scrims. I don't even, like, I actually don't think that they're that much worse, right? Like, they just play hyper-aggressive on stage, they play hyper-aggressive in scrims. Like, that's just the way it is. And obviously in scrims, like, maybe the enemy team decides to commit even harder rather than that. But ultimately, I feel like the people making the aggressive decisions make the same decisions. They're not like, I wouldn't do that if I were on stage. It's more like, this is good, I'm going to do this. And that's the end of that. It's not a discussion of, are we on stage or are we playing scrims? It's just, it's good, I'm doing it. And this is something I think Europe kind of misses in the idea that people are like, oh, in scrims I would do that. On stage I would never. I feel like I've tried to be a player that never does that. Whenever my coach tells me, you wouldn't do that on stage, I look at him in the eye and I'm like...
You're like, did you watch me last week? I ran it down 2 times before I carried that game with a rupture.
Exactly. It's like... I very much am committed to playing the same game. And another reason for some success I've had in the past is I've very much related my solo queue experience as well as my scrim experience to stage as well as back and forth, right? Things I learn on stage, they will go into my solo queue experience and my scrim experience, and things I learn in solo queue will go into my scrim experience and my stage experience. Because as a player, when I originally started in 2018 on Fnatic, I got 1 game a day. I had 1 game a day. That was my EULCS match of the day back then. It was still the EULCS.
Are you saying then a ton of your development came from basically like, you're not getting it in scrims, you have to find it elsewhere, so you're finding your development plan in solo queue?
It was just, I saw what was happening in scrims, right? So I was obviously watching the whole day. So I had 6 games a day, 6 games a day back then. Sorry about that. And I eventually realized that what I needed to do was just watch all those games, make a database of like, this is what our team wanted, It was really easy for me to look at the games and be like, all right, so I did this, and this wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think the team would have been better off if he did this, right? Like, that was the idea. And it was really easy for me to just keep looking at the scrims and just be like, all right, in that situation, I should be doing that because that looks better, or I want to try that at least. That makes more sense. And then we would discuss that, or we wouldn't. Like, it just depends on the day. And I would go into solo queue and I would play my game and I would like try to replicate that scenario. Or when I'm in a situation that's very similar, I would play it out. And if I noticed, hey, that worked out pretty good, that's what I would bring to scrims, right? And because I only had 1 game a day, I had to prepare that all the time. I had to be ready for all those decisions that I wanted to make. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why 2018 was a great year for me. At least I would say it was. Because I got to see so much and I got to just be what my team needed. I didn't need to be anything other than what my team needed. I just saw my team would like to have this in from their top laner, right? Like they would like to have TP advantage in this situation. They would like to have this champion in this situation. They would like to have, I don't know, their top laners show up in this situation. And that's all I had to do. I had to just prepare and play solo queue all day to make sure that these things happened. And then I just showed up and, hi, I'm playing Sion and I'm dying every laning phase, but it doesn't matter because as long as I have pressure, we're winning. So I'm just playing like a madman regardless of the fact that I just died. No fear. That's what my top laner, that's what Fnatic's top laner didn't need, but they functioned best when that happened. And that's what I was trying to replicate every single time I was playing in 2018 is with the information I got from SOAS playing, I would replicate. Fnatic performs best when their top laner does this. And then I would just play solo queue as much as I needed to replicate exactly that.
Why do you think that Fnatic performed well when their top laner was just absorbing a ton of pressure? Do you think it had something inherently to do with the playstyle, that if you're just absorbing everyone's time, that either Reckless or whoever gets to pop off caps at that point?
Right, caps in the past. I mean, it was obviously because I felt like as a team we were very reactive. Like, the thing is in 2018, I felt like we were more of a reactive team than a proactive team when it comes down to it. Like, don't get me wrong, I think we had some very good proactive plans, and we weren't a team that was by any means AFK. But when it came to it, playing reactively was something that we were better at least how I felt.
How much did it hurt?
Having to proactively make a... Oh, sure, go ahead.
How much did it hurt Fnatic's? Because we talk about like communication, synergy. I listen to a lot of comms. Caps is pretty amazing in comms. How much did it hurt to lose one of those voices?
I think in the end, like the strongest thing about Caps and his communication is the fact that he's trying to like drive the game forward, and he's getting people to play around him whilst he's doing that. And I think that's a very powerful trait to have as a player. And I think Nemesis does a very good job of this too, actually. And what ends up happening is that because your mid laner is the focal point and the game is being played around them, that everything is involving your mid laner. And when everything involves your mid laner, you're playing, at least the general consensus is, you're playing a good game of League of Legends. So if your mid laner is going bot lane, that's good because you're bringing your mid laner. If your mid laner is going top lane, that's good because you're bringing your mid laner. And if you're going mid, then that's also fine because you're going mid lane and your mid laner is involved mid. So far, that's been League of Legends in a nutshell. Since the dawn of Faker coming in and showing people how overpowered mid lane really could be. But like I was mentioning earlier, Fnatic wasn't a slow team. It was just that when we were reactive, we were better. So when I was getting ganked top lane and I survived, that was like, we have a freebie, you know, like as a free play, we just got donated by the enemy team. And that was either mid lane or bot lane. But whatever happened was more like, I felt like 2018 was this simple. Every single laner is just sitting there being like, where is the enemy jungler? Waiting, like they're like rubbing their hands, when he shows, this guy's gonna get it. And then the only job I had was to make sure the guy showed. So it's like, this guy really doesn't want to show, huh? Well, I guess I'll go proxy a wave. Now, if he doesn't want to come to me, I'll go proxy a wave and I'll go find him in his jungle. And well, guess what? The game's not that hard. If he's not in his topside jungle, I already found him. I did my job. And I know a lot of games where action started because I decided to proxy a wave. It's pretty funny. Like I'm playing Sion and it's like, gotcha. Like you think you got me.
Meanwhile,
but I got you.
Reckless and Hilly are 2v2 killing bot side. Yeah, okay.
But we had the patience, and I think that's something that we don't have as much anymore as laners, including me, right? And my job was always to find the enemy jungler. At least that's how I felt. If one of my teammates wanted to point out that I was just griefing the whole time and I was inting them, now I would know. But I feel like my job was find the guy so that my team can make a reactive play to where he is on the map. And if he doesn't want to show up, I would feel free to participate mid lane or participate through bot lane and just make a play with my teammates. But in the end, I think that was... I think that's what made me a strong player. The fact that I could recognize what my team needed, or at least I felt like the team needed, and then apply that through solo queue. Like, that's the thing. I never did this by scrimming 200 or 300. Like, I did end up scrimming a lot with the team when I was considered a starting player. But ultimately it started with the idea of me using the information that I got from watching the team play.
This is such a solo queue mentality. If I run it down top side and I get ganked by the jungle, immediately open up all chat.
Well,
guys, what are you doing mid lane? Come on.
Okay, all right. So, but memes aside,
I joke.
this is. I want to bring it back to Fnatic now because I think you've given us a ton of insight and context as to like one, how Fnatic used to be, and two, how a lot of the decisions are being made currently for Fnatic in draft. But like,
Right.
do you feel like now on this new Fnatic that your role is no longer as clear, that within the context of this new team trying to learn a new strategy
I mean,
together?
in this system, champions like Tom, Kench, Orianna, Ezreal, champions that basically don't die in lane phase and just sit there and scale would be like the ultimate counter. Because if Bwipo's drawing pressure, the enemy jungler shows up. It's not like Reckless and Hilly can punish Kench Aphelios or kill Orianna.
I'll have you know that, according to Hylissang, and this is his words, Tahm Kench is the squishiest champion in the game at level 2.
Then lock in Pike and show me.
I'm just letting you know, this is something that Hylissang is very focused. Like, Tahm Kench is not a tanky champion, according to Hilly. And I don't disagree. If you go on Tahm Kench, he's not that hard to kill. It's just a matter of committing to killing him, right?
We've seen Hilly on Tom Kench. I think all Fnatic fans know that he's not that tanky.
Oh, no. Why? It's just every shot you can take.
That's doing him dirty.
But like really at the core of it, yeah, do you feel like your role is defined? Like, do you think that you know what this Fnatic lineup needs from you in the same way that you did in 2018?
Not in the same way. I don't think it's nearly as clear. It's much more difficult to extract that information from players by like talking to them. Like, it's way easier to just look at the game being played and be like, all right, this guy's not doing this and I would do that. And that's the difference, right? That's why having a substitute, in my opinion, is a positive thing. I even asked Fnatic 2 years in a row, like, please, if you can get someone that could maybe contest me, just do it. You know, like, just don't hesitate. I'll help the guy. I'll actually get the guy to play better, because I know for a fact that down the line, he'll make me a better player. That's a fact. If there's anyone that can contest me for my spot, I would be really happy, because that means that even if I don't perform on Fnatic anymore, or I'm not good enough compared to that guy, I'll be better than I am right now.
But I
Does
really,
that make sense?
Yeah, I respect like the hustle and the humbleness. I always really enjoy talking to you. You're so eloquent, and I think personally very intelligent about the game. But I don't know. I'm just picking up. I'm just picking up all these trends. Like, you know, when you talk about how, you know, I didn't show up for the finals and this was my fault, and if they can find a guy that can test me, like, mad respect, because all you can really control at the end of the day is yourself and your relationship to your teammates. You can't micromanage anyone else. But like, talk to me about some of the internalized, or what sounds like, I don't mean to like put you on the therapy couch right now, like internalized almost like burden that you're carrying there. Like, I hear it when I talk to Reckless as well. This idea of like, anytime you talk to a Fnatic member, they're just, you know, that was my fault and I made the error and I made the big mistake, and if I had played better and if I had shown up. And I just have to think, like, it just sounds like such a down, like, you talk to G2 members, you talk to Rogue members, Mad Lions members, and I'm not saying don't take it professionally or seriously, but it is such a different atmosphere and aura that surrounds the team. And like, do you think that mental edge comes into play? Because as a bystander looking in, I'm like, it's rough to be Fnatic. It's rough to have those fans. It's rough to hold yourself at such high accountability. It's rough when you go into a team and everyone's like, I suck, and I'm the reason why we all lost. And if everyone believes it, I'm like, no wonder this team is like collapsing.
I mean, everyone takes their share of the blame, right? I think that's like the first thing. And the second thing is that I think it's having a winner's mentality. That's like the first thing, right? Like, blaming yourself for what you don't have is in my opinion the first thing. Not blaming yourself is not unnecessary, but recognizing what you don't have is 100% necessary in order to improve as a player. And I think that's what we're trying to do. Like, looking forward as players, what can we do to make our team special, right? For me, at least, this is something that I've always wanted to be. I wanted to be a player that you can tell you're playing with me. You know, I'm not top laner A, B, or C. I'm me. You're playing with Bwipo. You're not playing with top laner A, B, or C in your career, right? When you play a year of League of Legends with me on your team, 2 years, 3 years of League of Legends with me on your team, that you can actively tell in and outside of the game you've experienced playing with me. To me, at least, this is super important. And taking my share of the blame is something that for me is super important, as well as the fact that I follow a very simple philosophy. If I were the best top laner in the LEC, my team wouldn't lose. It's that simple. I would carry every single game. I'm not doing that. That means that I'm not as good as I could be. That means I'm not as good as I want to be. That means the blame is partly on me. And there's a general consensus when blame is able to be taken on yourself. Blaming anything but yourself is poor taste. That's just the way I look at life. So that's why I am not a depressed person. I do not mind all our fans criticizing us. I'm okay with all of that. I understand why they do it. The only thing is sometimes people criticize things that they have absolutely zero clue about. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
That is what bothers me. They actually actively criticize things that they don't even understand why I would make that decision. They don't even understand why I made that mistake. And that's very frustrating because I had a very good reason to contest my wave in the Cho'Gath game that I died twice against Misfits. Was it the right decision? No. Am I trying to do too much? Absolutely. My champion is not designed to do that. But if I can pull off what I wanted to pull off and have impact in the early game on a champion like Cho'Gath, that is what I mean with being the best top laner in the LEC. No matter what champion I pick, I have influence on the map. No matter what champion I pick, I am using my wave management. I am using my teleport. I am using my pressure. Whatever I have in a way that the enemy team feels like this guy's in the game. Shit, Cho'Gath's TPing. People are like, Cho'Gath TP, what's that do? You know, like, it's a Cho'Gath. Sorry, I'm...
It's fine. Pop off, dude. Go for it. You're good.
It's a Cho'Gath. What's he gonna do? And then Cho'Gath actually TPs and you're like, wait a minute.
Champion's broke.
This guy just owned us. Like, this guy just owned us. Like, what do you mean? And I want to be that guy that's like, this guy is winning early game playing Cho'Gath. And then you look at your top lane and you're like, you're playing Jace. Why? How? What is happening? This is what I'm looking for as a player, right? To make people think like that. Make people realize, like, the game isn't black and white. I can play a scaling champion and show up early game.
Your cats agree.
Which
cat? It's unclear. Bwipo,
it's Cheeto.
Cheeto agrees.
He
God
agrees.
damn it, Cheeto and Nacho. Your cat's names are so cute. Bwipo, like, a final question here, because I appreciate that you're so personally focused and you talk about like the mistakes that you're doing and how you can play the game better. And Frost brought it up that whenever we talk to Fnatic, remember that's how it is. Which means that the downside of that is, on the one hand, while we get that personal accountability, while we know that you all take yourselves seriously, we don't get as much of the team perspective and the here's our next step as a group. So to kind of wrap this portion of the discussion up before we go to Twitter questions, I want to know, like, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Do you feel like the team is coming together? Like, these things are improving week to week? Like, for the Fnatic fans out there who are feeling jaded or who are feeling disappointed right now, like, do you see the stepping stones needed for Fnatic to be back at, the top of Europe fighting in playoffs?
There's only one way for it to answer that question. Like, it's a good question. I understand why you ask it, but Bwipo can only give one answer to that question.
But he can give a Bwipo answer, which means maybe he can provide more context. See...
We're putting Nacho and Cheeto on stage.
This is my fan service question, because I think people want to hear it. They want you to be Papa Bwipo. They want you to tuck them in at night and tell them that everything's going to be okay and Fnatic's going to be right back on top. So can we get the?
I mean, I believe in that. I do believe in that. I do believe light at the end of the tunnel. The light never ended. Like, there was never a point where I was like, it's dark. I can't see where we're going. It's just like, we tried to change our strategy. We had some growing pains doing that. I was part of those growing pains. And then we ended up in where we ended up, which is now here. We come off a 2-0 week where everyone's like, it's the worst 2-0 week I've ever seen. But at the same time, I come from a planet where in 2019 Worlds, when G2 beat SKT after coming back in pretty much every game from a huge deficit, they were considered the best team in the world because of that. And I'm sitting there being like, we just came back from an 8K deficit.
Who'd you come back against, Bwipo? Context is important, my dude.
Sorry, my cat just jumped on me.
Yeah, I was going to say, who'd you come back against, Bwipo? Was it SKT? Was it Faker?
Yeah, I mean, is that really like that big of a deal? Like, honestly, like coming back in League of Legends is still a skill.
Fevin did kill Faker.
It's still somewhat of a skill. I'm not saying they played perfectly,
right,
but it's not like they played that poorly. It's not like they griefed and like they donated us the game.
It's true. And Bwipo, I agree. those wins still mean something. It still shows that when it matters, that you can pull together as a team. People shouldn't take all the credit away from you. But it's also not the same as comeback wins against SKT in a world whatever.
Sure, I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying that, like, it's such a stark difference in contrast, to me at least. You know, it's like, you beat Misfits coming back. You should have never been behind. What were you doing? You know, it's like angry parents, you know? You come back and it's like, you should have never failed that test in the first place. You would
They
never,
are,
like,
dude.
You
They
score,
are
like,
angry
you do your
parents.
exam again. Like, you do your exam, you come back and you're like, you fail it. You do it again and you ace it, you know?
I will
Maybe acing
say
it is a bit much.
that entire cast,
Then you get roasted
Dracos,
for it.
Dracos kept being like, you know, Fnatic, we've seen this in this situation. You can never fall behind. And the reason why, like, I know Reddit got really upset that we said that shit, but, like, the reason why we say that shit, and this isn't necessarily to you, Bwipo, but more so to the listeners, is because teams like Fnatic and G2 think about the game differently. You guys, like, see opportunities that other teams do not, which means you have more chances to come back. Like, if any other team in the LEC only sees 3 opportunities to come back, G2 and Fnatic see 17. And that's why that shit happens all the time to those teams. And that's the easiest way I can break it down.
I agree.
Spicy.
DOS engaging without his backline being in a position to do damage. I agree.
It
What
was-
an
that was-
opportunity that Fnatic saw.
It's a perfect example,
Hand
Dracos.
delivered to them. They just got walked at. Oh, that was perfect. I agree. Fnatic, how they saw that opportunity. So much brilliant.
In the meanwhile, I do think it would be good for me to, like, really state, reassure people that yes, we understand the split hasn't been great. We understand where we're at. We're trying to change what is necessary, what we feel like we need to change, and we are on the path to redemption, if you will. Performance will come. It will be fine. We'll do our best. Don't worry about it. Like, we're doing our best all the time. We're trying our hardest, no matter what's happening. And we're gonna be a top team at the end. You know, like I refuse to see this team not make playoffs. Like, that's the minimum. That's the bare minimum. But not making Worlds would just be a huge disappointment, really. And even though it's like, looking at it that way, it's like, you shouldn't be looking at Worlds. Maybe it's just, for myself, like, I don't think I would forgive myself missing out on Worlds, given the strength of the roster I'm playing on. And here it comes back to me taking responsibility for my team and whatnot. You mentioned it earlier, but that's just the way I feel. Like, I've got all the tools I need to go to Worlds and perform. You know, I've got the team, I've got the staff, I've got everything, and that's basically what you need, right? A computer, a team that's strong enough, staff that's smart enough, and beyond that point, what more can I ask for other than just show up?
I like it, Bwipo. Maybe a bit reductionist. Obviously, there's a lot more interpersonal relationships past you have a person and a computer, and that's all that you need. But I like it, and thank you for kind of wrapping it up nicely with that message. Getting to Twitter questions real quick. We're going to take a quick 180 in terms of the tone and the seriousness here, because we went from, it's on me, I can do it, Worlds, I've got all the tools, to this question from Steelings at Barry Yo. Why isn't Renekton picked more often than it is now? I think the champion is very strong at the moment, in parentheses, solo queue. So why don't we see as much Renekton, Bwipo?
Scaling in this game is something that's considered as I feel like the perspective on scaling is very different and wrong for many players. Scaling is being seen as something that when this champion outscales Renekton can't play the game. When in reality, it's when this champion outscales Renekton gets outscaled because it's harder for him to find usefulness in the game. It's harder for him to find opportunities where he can perform. It's harder for Renekton to deal damage, to be a frontliner, to be what you need him to be, right? And depending on what composition you have, that will change. But Renekton as a champion, he's not really a frontline champion. He's not a tank like Ornn. He doesn't like walk up and take damage. He doesn't have reliable crowd control or AoE CC, so you can't use him as that. So the only way you can use Renekton is, realistically speaking, as a disrupting the flow of a team fight, right? Renekton jumps in, everyone has to focus Renekton because he's a big, beefy crocodile that deals a lot of damage if you ignore him. But it's also really easy to focus him down. He's not very mobile. So in other words, scaling is being looked at as, you can't play the game if you get outscaled, rather than it's much harder to play the game. I think this is why Renekton doesn't see play, because for the Renekton player, it's much harder to play the game. So rather than having to go through such a difficult task of winning the early game, or first winning the early game, and then still having to go through effort to be useful late game, why not just pick a champion that scales into the late game and doesn't have to worry about being useful? He will always provide something.
And that's why Finn picked Alawi. It all makes sense now.
Alawi is another champion where it's like sometimes useful.
No, I was mostly kidding. I think Alawi is useless. Champions without hard CC.
Whoa, rude. Anytime someone's trying to dive into the back line, Alawi's like, this is exactly what I want.
Similar to Darius, if people can't read a kit and you walk into them.
Whoa, Darius is running forward. Alawi running backwards.
Oh, sure. Okay. All right. Good to know.
Technically standing very still.
Sometimes have to do that, right? Like, that's another example. Renekton kind of has to do that, right? Renekton can't sit there and be like, I'm going to kill the tank. That's my job this fight. Not really. He can't do that. He doesn't have the kit to actually kill a tank. So he has to go backline. But if he can't, like, his tools to go backline are so limited, you're like wondering where, like, what is your job actually? And I think that's something that people don't actually think about enough. And I think that's something that a lot of builds you don't see enough. And I think LS actually brings this up a lot, which I agree with, in the idea that, like, champions like this, like Lee Sin, Jarvan, when their only job is to go backline and die, then you might as well build a crap load of damage and just commit to that. No,
that's what they do in the LPL.
Why don't we have exactly? Why not play Renekton with 3 lethality items? You know what? I'm only gonna get 1 W anyway. I might as well flash in on a carry and 1-tap the guy.
The biggest difference between like global Jarvans and LPL Jarvans is those Jarvans would build like full damage, whereas the global Jarvans like building full tank. And the LPL Jarvan mentality is like, I'm in a league with Uzi, Jackie Love, iBoy. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna trade half my health bar just to chunk out the ADC. And guess what? I just took out the best player. So screw all you guys.
Good luck. I like it. One more question, Bwipo, before we let you go, from Mr. Gatsy. Yeah, Mr. Gatsy. It's kind of a long question. Playing scrims and training all day. When he comes home, does he play League with his GF as well? But the core of the question is, how do you balance playing professionally with your personal life? Like, how much time do you actually have? You've got an apartment. Clearly, you've got cats.
His blinds actually just are stuck in a breeze. It has nothing to do with a cat.
Yeah. Oh, then again, they do like playing with the blinds, to be honest with you.
So, yeah, talking about a little bit about balancing, especially with, like, you know, this community pressure and going all that. What is your work-life balance like right now, Bwipo?
So, generally speaking, the way I looked at it was I was figuring, I figure about... So, right now, our scrim schedule is you get at the office at 1 p.m., we have our meeting, we have lunch, 1 hour, we scrim 5 hours, 7 p.m., we have a little team meeting at the end of it, discuss how the day went. That's our schedule. Sometimes we come in at 12 to make sure that we have more time for the meetings, we can discuss picks, whatever, maybe preparation for the games on stage, whatever is necessary, right? So when you think about that, it's like, what, 8 hours at, like, best? Like, that's 8 hours in a day, like, considering, like, you know, traveling back and forth, which is like 10-minute walk, you know, sticking around, whatever, like, things delayed. So 8 hours a day is like the work day. This is scrims, this is talking about the game with the team, all that. Which means that for a normal working day, that's not that much, you know, that's very average. In fact, I would say it's normal. So you've got 16 hours left, so 8 hours to sleep comfortably, and the rest is your own thing, right? So for me personally, I spend about 3 to 4 hours in solo queue after that. So I like to play like 5 or 6 games of solo queue a day. Sometimes that's 4 games, sometimes that's 3, sometimes it's 7. It just depends on how interested I am in a certain pick, how much I want to practice that pick, how much I value playing solo queue on that champion. Because to me, at least, solo queue is always great, but at a certain point, it also changes the way you look at a champion, and I don't think that's always a good thing. At least I've noticed in the past that I undervalued a champion because my solo queue experience with that champion was bad, rather than just... I'll give you an example, Ornn. You play all the solo queue on Ornn, you'll realize, like, oh, I can't do anything on this champ. Never playing a dog champ again. That was a reference. You know? Whereas in reality, when you play Ornn in a competitive game, you know, like, holy moly, this champion does everything you need a top laner to do. He deals disturbing amounts of base damage, as I reminded Comp last weekend. Tanks everything you need to tank, has great scaling, donates items to your teammates, upgrades their items, makes them even better, brings CC, long range engage at times. It's not that reliable as it used to be, but in the past, Orange Horn was a reliable hard engage from across your screen. You know, like, that guy's at the tier 2 mid, I'm at my tier 2 mid.
As much as
good chance I got him, you know.
But what else? Like, so okay, after solo queue, after League of Legends, you got like 4 hours left in the day. What else outside of theory crafting? How absolutely broken Ornn is in
how much
Kong?
time goes to like petting the cats?
Yeah, how much time do you actually have at home? What do you do?
Watching movies.
Well, like generally speaking, after the workday, I go home. So it's like at 8 p.m. or like 8:30, sometimes 9. I'm home, and that's just from that point on. I'm like, all right, I'll play solo queue until I don't feel like it, or you know, sometimes it's 12, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 11, and then comes time for myself. And sometimes I choose to spend that playing with a girlfriend. Sometimes I choose to spend that petting the cats with a girlfriend. It's usually with the girlfriend. Yes, I do spend every single day. I spend time with my girlfriend, no matter what. So yeah, like there's like I think like ideally 3 hours a day I try to like spend for myself, my girlfriend. Just like it's not always together. Like sometimes I'm playing like TFT or something, and she's like watching something or whatever, but we try to connect with each other. We try to
time adjacent to each other sometimes is the best.
Get yourself a man who pets the cats with his girlfriend like Bwipo
Bwipo does. That's the goal. All right, Bwipo, we're gonna wrap.
I don't do it all the time, but sometimes.
Bwipo, we're gonna wrap up here. This has been EUphoria Season 6, Episode 6. Thank you again, Bwipo, so much for coming on. I wish you the best of luck and many more 2-0s in your future.
I hope for you to come cast with us again.
Thank you.
Oh yeah.
Thank Mr. Dracos.
Yeah. Ooh. Ooh, I like that. We get that spam. Yeah, we'll get you to cast with us for sure. Just as a note, if for any reason, if you end up missing playoffs, God forbid for Fnatic fans, I will be trying to poach you as quickly as possible. Don't tell your manager.
Sounds good to me.
Or maybe do tell your manager. Maybe he'll be excited about it. Regardless, yeah, thanks again for coming to cast with us. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Have a good rest of the day, Bwipo. And thank you to everyone who watched. This has been EUphoria once again, Season 6, Episode 6. Yeah, we'll see you next week.